is Zachary Resnick, and here with you, Constantin Kogan. Hi, Zach.
Hey, Constantine. Great to be on the show.
Yes, and Zach is a managing partner of Outbound Capital, and we're going to talk about his journey in this crypto world and basically how he, and why he decided to build a hybrid model of crypto and venture hedge fund, right? And before we start, I think it's important in this days to give a little bit of a disclaimer and say that we're not a research report and we're not giving investment and legal advice. It's a personal opinion, and basically this content is only for informational purposes. So from here we can start and we can talk about your journey. It's I've heard about your name from various sources, and somehow we've met each other.
Oh, various. Wow.
Yes. So I'm lucky to have you here. And, to begin with, I'm just curious to hear about your journey. It all starts somewhere, and just tell us how you got into this crypto rabbit hole, and why did you start your fund?
So I first heard about Bitcoin in the context of poker. So poker players were both early adopters of the technology as well as early speculators. Largely through online poker. So what's always been the bottleneck towards scaling any type of online gaming is payment processing and getting money in and out of these different gaming sites and dealing with the different gambling laws all around the world. So when Bitcoin first became a little bit popular, you had sites that supported depositing and withdrawing with Bitcoin. So that's when I first saw it. Didn't really think much of it. It was like, oh, this is this weird thing. Some of the sites are giving you like a bonus to use this. It's supposedly faster. Some people are using it. Some poker players got in the habit of only doing their withdrawing in Bitcoin, and then, that appreciating a lot, and kind of got used to that. So I heard stories, but, I never really kind of dove in. What made me kind of dive in and learn and, within a short period of time want to, look at this in a professional context was actually a completely chance encounter. I was staying at an Airbnb in Tel Aviv, and the owner of the Airbnb, I was renting like a room in his apartment. And we spoke a little bit when I first got in, and I asked what he's doing, and his name is Yuval Ruach, and he's the founder of Bits of Gold, which is now, a big company. They're the largest Bitcoin to shekel or Bitcoin core to shekel exchange. And yeah, we ended up talking that night for like 5 hours, and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and within a few days, I first got a little bit of exposure to Bitcoin. This was in 2016.
How much did you buy?
I put, about, by the end of my buying spree after the month, about 20% of my, very meager college student net worth at the time.
It's pretty bullish still, as a poker player, by the way, did you play Texas Hold'em?
Yeah, Texas Hold'em has been the main game for me.
Got it. So, I can imagine 20% is still substantial. Most of the financial advisors were saying don't put more than 10%, God forbid, or it's very risky, or even less. So 20%, I would say it's a stake of a believer, not just a person who's investing for speculation, but also who actually believes in the core values and ideas of the industry, right?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say what percentage of your assets or liquid assets you should allocate to something is a lot more of a question of goals and risk profile. It's a very individual thing. It's more based on your personal life goals and emotions, not so much based on what's the best way to have maximize your risk adjusted expected value or returns. So my thinking then and similar now is I'm young, I have the ability to pivot and make money and start businesses and doing other things. So if I could find things that have a really high expected value, even if there's a lot of variance or kind of risk in the short term, it makes sense for me to kind of go in on that. And I'd say at the time I was, I wouldn't necessarily use the term believer. I just thought it was a really, really good bet relative to any other kind of financial opportunity that I saw. And now I I think it's an even better bet, and which is why I now have, basically 100% of, my liquid net worth in, in my funds invested in the BSV ecosystem.
It's impressive. So it's a calculated risk, you would call it, right? So you actually made a decision, you analyze, why are you investing, right? And so again, 2018, right? So how old were you?
So in 2018, when the fund started, or I guess when the fund started, I was 25.
Nice. So I assume you're 27 right now, right?
I am 27. Yeah, sorry.
So that's impressive.
Math is hard sometimes.
It's impressive. No, you're a hedge fund manager at 27 years old and, managing a successful fund. We're going to talk about your returns, about your strategy. So I think, what's impressive about crypto that most of the folks I talk to, right, in our, as BitBull Capital, we're the first crypto fund of funds, we did diligence, more than 400 different crypto hedge funds. And I can tell that, a lot of the folks are actually your age, our age, basically. I'm similar to this age, right? I'm 31 right now. So I would say it's pretty young for hedge fund managers, it's for any emerging markets, and young entrepreneurs, I would say typically people from the investment banking are starting a little bit later when they already have some experience, some substantial network, and they're going out there and just, they're fundraising, because it's not easy, I don't have to tell you, right? So to raise for a fund, you need to build a lot of trust with your anchor investors, right? So my question to you, what made you start, and specifically build this structure of a hybrid model between venture and hedge fund?
To how the fund started. So after I became, really interested in crypto and blockchain, I had the opportunity to do some consulting for a green energy financing company in the Bay Area. And while I was here, I, got to network with a lot of people that were very big in the crypto and blockchain industry. And, from what went from, a big investment and a big interest long-term, after meeting some of the people, turned into, oh my God, I want to be working in this. What's the best way to do so? And, I've until then, I've always fashioned myself more as an entrepreneur than as an investor. So as an entrepreneur, you're investing. You're always investing, but you're investing your time versus capital. And then I was living with my cousin, whose company I was doing some work for, and ended up doing some co-investing with him, and then managing some of his capital in investing in this space. And he was the kind of the person to really, believe in me, bet on me, and was, saw kind of the different things I've done over the years, whether it's playing a lot of poker or various miles and points arbitrages. And at the time I was there, every Thanksgiving for a few years, I do some of this Black Friday arbitrage where I use all my different credit cards and order Xbox is 50% off, but you can only get one of them. So I'd figure out a way to get 50 of them. I'd ship it to some warehouse in Crown Heights, and then I'd get the points that I get plus the multiplier for using the portal on the points, and then some commission on that. So he saw me doing that thing over Thanksgiving when I'm staying with him. He's like, I think this mind is going to be better for investing long term than potentially running things. And that
you were an entrepreneur before
way.
You started, right? So that was your core, right?
Yeah, but I think now it's clear that for how I like to spend my time and where I think my skill set lies, investing is a better fit for me long term. I'm very much an entrepreneur with the fund, as when you're getting a fund started, it's as much, if not more so, time spent building your business as opposed to always focusing on making investment decisions. But I personally feel a lot happier and content when I'm reading, researching, having conversations like this, making investment decisions, as opposed to the kind of the more hustling operational aspects of business. So I like both. I'm never going to stop doing both, but a lot more of my time on kind of making big long-term decisions and trying to find ways, an orthodox opinion or, herd mentality is lacking something in the pursuit of truth. So I started investing with Dan, and then after, that went very well, we thought that there would be an opportunity to, make outsized returns investing into this industry. And then that decision was made around late January of 2018 to kind of get this started. And due to a variety of things, including kind of the market bottoming out, it ended up taking a bit longer to finally get things started. But in August of 2018, we launched our fund. And then in April of 2019, we switched to focusing in the BSV ecosystem, and shortly after kind of rebranded as Unbounded Capital. And now I feel like, from an entrepreneurial perspective, we've kind of found that product market fit. We're one of the only funds investing in this ecosystem. We think the potential for returns here are greater than almost any other sub-market or asset class in the world, and just feel lucky to kind of have discovered this, at the time that we have.
So that's impressive, because I remember 2018. It definitely was not the best time to start. According to Eureka Hedge, you remember that most of the funds were competing, either minus 60 or minus 80, right? And so that was definitely very tough times. And I know some of the funds actually bankrupted because they started in the early 2018 with the premises that, okay, crypto is going to grow to the moon, everything is great. There's so much enthusiasm, and then reality came, right? And it was like it was a bearish market, and nobody even understood where and how it's going to stop, right? So you basically survived like a very important milestone, right? So that's like you were baptized in the battle, I would say, right? So my question to you, what made you so resilient to those obstacles, and how did you understand how to basically, I would say, be flexible enough and change, the strategy and go to the BSV community? And tell us about this struggle.
We first started investing into the space. I'd say a significant amount of our time was spent, reading like shitty white papers and, wading through all these things that were like very, use a lot of intellectual language, use a lot of kind of things that made it seem smart, but lacking a lot of substance, and especially lacking a lot of like operational skill and know-how from the entrepreneurs that, said they were going to do these things. So it was a lot of time wading through a bunch of BS. And, I think, we found some good companies to invest in even before kind of making our thesis switch to BSV. But it was a lot of time and a lot of noise compared to finding good signals. And then, I'm really lucky to be working with, two of my just like best friends, and what we all share in common is that we really enjoy, finding opportunities to be right when everyone else kind of isn't sharing that thing. It's something that got me into a lot of, trouble, and perhaps like, stunted certain aspects of my emotional and social growth for many years, but I think lend itself well towards, managing capital, especially in a market like this. And we kind of were of the, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Core BTC is, the best Bitcoin, and it's, it's going to take over, and it's a great investment. And, we're going to invest in some other companies too, but, we're really bullish on this version of Bitcoin, and just completely wrote off Bitcoin Cash and later BSV without really seriously doing diligence, just because all the people that, we thought to respect and the things that we're reading are just, writing these technologies and chains off and writing the people off. And even though we fashioned ourselves as contrarians, we didn't really do the diligence or read things firsthand. And then we ended up reading some of Roger Ver's stuff firsthand, learning a little bit about the different Bitcoin communities on Reddit. And we're like, oh, even if we're not kind of bullish on big blocks or Bitcoin Cash, this is a little fucked up. And kind of our alarm bells are going on. I was like, oh, if this person's being a little kind of shadow banned or censored or misquoted, like maybe there's some truth here. And, after diving in, we started to not have very high conviction, but high enough conviction to start allocating to Bitcoin Cash and kind of the bigger block scaling approach for proof of work networks, but still kind of, laughing, writing off Craig Wright and BSV. And then by chance, the one of my investors and advisors is a co-founder of the Node co-working space, Seth Goldstein, crypto co-working space in North Beach in San Francisco. Amazing community, highly recommend it. Everyone should join. They were doing the kind of San Francisco Bitcoin Cash meetup, which then, based on the people attending, when the Cash and SV fork happened, it turned into the BSV meetup. And one of my partners, Dave, he was like, let's steelman this. Like, if we're becoming more bullish on Cash, like, let's see what these BSV jokesters are up to. Like, why not just attend a meeting? What's the worst that can happen? And I happened to be out of town or I couldn't make it to that first one. And then Dave called me right when he left and was like, Zach, like, oh my God, this is the first crypto like meetup I've ever been to where no one talked about price, no one's talking about mooning. It's just, I felt like the dumbest guy in the room. It was just like a small group of like highly, technical people that wanted to build things. And I was like, okay, that's pretty bullish, but like, come on, what's going on here? And then I remembered feeling like the same way I did when I first read the Bitcoin white paper and like started learning about all these things in 2016. I had that feeling of like, oh wow, there's so much to learn. There's so much that people think that isn't so. And within a couple weeks, we were like, okay, like we should probably start allocating to this soon. But we're having kind of internal deliberations about how to do so. And then we had this delisting happening in mid-April of 2019 from Kraken and Binance due to CZ not liking Craig Wright. And after that happened, we were like, okay, we could keep waiting to find an entry point, but if it just goes down, 25-30% based on a delisting when nothing fundamental changed, like this is probably as good as entry point as ever. And that's when we started buying into the market, and we got lucky. That was the absolute low, at least for now, of BSV. And within about a month we were like incredibly bullish, and then just deliberating, does it make sense to go all in on this? And I frankly, I was kind of the one pushing back and going all in from the beginning, as I think of myself as an investor that wants to be diversified and doesn't want to kind of quote go all in on this one kind of speculative thing. But the more that I learned, the more that I had the conviction that it just seems really unlikely that any other, at least existing chain, is going to kind of work out. So we're still theoretically open to other proof of work networks that are scaling, but it's this rare opportunity where pretty much everyone in the community is discounting this asset and this community, where I have high conviction that this is very likely to succeed. So it's not very often you see asymmetric bets like that in your life. So I figured, both from the standpoint of building out a firm as well as being a fiduciary, I couldn't really in good faith hold Bitcoin Core or invest in companies that are building on blockchains that can't scale. So that we decided to pivot to a BSV ecosystem fund, and now here we are.
So let's stop here for a second, right? So before we go a deeper dive into your strategy, because I'm interested, like, how do you allocate, like, into BSV, and maybe some you diversify and some just a little bit of Bitcoin, and then how do you even do diligence into projects? But before that, like, look, I just have to ask you this question, right? Because regarding the personality of Craig Wright, because
sure.
There's so many different rumors, controversy, like, he had a lawsuit against him, right? And there's the biggest one, and, I just want to know your opinion on this. Like, of course, it's he's claimed that he's Satoshi Nakamoto, right? So there's a very clear path and clear way how he could have proven that, right? And he decided not to go this route. And as you can imagine, like, according to Murphy law, right? If you can do something and you're not doing this, so there's like a big chance that, that's actually like, that's not what's happening. And, he's not a Satoshi Nakamoto. At the same time, there's a lot of like, I would say prominent people who claim that they've seen the confirmation with their own eyes, right? And they are saying that we definitely think that he is the Satoshi Nakamoto. Well, and the community basically split, like into two factions, I would say. And the biggest part in this, right, it was out to me, at least, like, the biggest like I would say destructive, like in an unnecessary conflict, was when during the tsunami, right? When Vitalik Buterin like stood up and after a lot of unpleasant comments towards Ethereum, right? He stood up and basically said like, why this fraud is even like allowed to speak here? And afterwards he gave a very interesting interview, not being aggressive, but like actually rationally explaining why he thinks he's not a Satoshi, and secondly explaining why BSV actually does not have the same, like I would say, scalability as he's presenting. So my question to you first about his personality, right? Do you actually think, like a brief one, do you think that he's Satoshi Nakamoto?
So as an investor, I mean, in my life, whether it's a question about managing money or not, I'm a probabilistic thinker. So there's very few things I'll say, I'm 100% on. But I would say, yes, I'm high conviction that, Craig created Bitcoin, but don't trust my word on it. We put together a piece entitled, why we think Craig is Satoshi and why that matters. And, you could maybe link to that in the show notes.
Sure, I'll do that.
So
but briefly, if you can describe like, major like key takeaways like of this, like, this report.
So first off, before diving into this report, like if for whatever reason it was confirmed that Craig has been, lying, putting his family and his businesses at risk to pretend to be the creator of Bitcoin and, go to jail for, lying in, court in Florida and probably Australia and England too, we would buy BSV on the way down because it's the, best version of Bitcoin that's thousands of times faster and cheaper than the others. So first, I just want to frame this that Craig Wright as an individual, I view him as, an asset to BSV, but it's not synonymous with BSV. He's a leading figure in the community, but, if God forbid he were hit by a bus or something, it would be a blow, but, Bitcoin would continue to scale and, we'd move on. But, back to your question around, the takeaways from the report, there's been a lot of pieces circulating that, Craig, not only kind of lies about being Satoshi, but that he lies about degrees that he has. And I think if you actually look into the merits of those claims, they just don't really exist. So we went through some of those in the piece that we're going to link to. But a lot of the concern is around saying either he's lied about various degrees he's had, or that he doesn't have like the technical kind of wherewithal to have actually created Bitcoin and lied about various things that are, technical. And a lot of these are just taking small quotes out of context. But fundamentally, from our view, it's not so much that there's I'd say the leading narrative in the crypto community is that there's all this evidence he didn't create Bitcoin. Like, do you have the smoking gun that he did? Where from our kind of assessment of the evidence out there, especially the legal diligence on the court case over the Tulip Trusts with Ira Kleinman in Florida, there seems to be an overwhelming amount of evidence that he has. And there's also a lot of heuristics that, he probably has, as in, why kind of risk your businesses, your net worth, your family's livelihood on this thing going, what. Also, he didn't come out and say he was Satoshi. He was outed as Satoshi by, Wired Magazine and others. So that's kind of high level our view of things. And regarding the point that everyone seems, preoccupied with, which is, he could just prove he's Satoshi and sign the keys. I think it's important to think about
PGP key ideas. Like,
of course,
why would not present it? Like, it's a very simple way to, and that will remove entire conversations.
Of course it would.
No.
So here's the question for you, Constantine. Do you think that Craig solely has an incentive to prove he's Bitcoin with cryptographic evidence? Do you think there's only upside in that?
Definitely not. However, the question is like, when I follow this story, I understand that like I don't believe that he was ousted. Like I think he did it as a PR movement, right? And I think
why?
Why is a question that I don't know. I think only he knows. I have
no. I mean, how? Like we've looked like so he was outed by Wired Magazine and didn't set. Like, are you saying you've seen evidence that he was in contact with them?
Yes, I am in contact with like several PR people who actually told me that this was a paid article, right? And that was proven later. But regardless, whether we know
Yeah.
whether it was paid or not, it doesn't mean, like, look, if you're obviously making such a big claim, and then he later on confirmed that yes, he is a Satoshi, right? And he explained why and how he gave a lot of like interviews, which, like I think is was interesting, and like there's a lot of, to me, a lot of missing gaps, and we're not, because it can take like entire interview on that, right? But I would say, like, I tend to believe there is not enough evidence is number one. The reason why the person would do that, pretty simple, behavioral psychology, it's fame, because if you are looking to do a fork like BSV, right? So it's great to claim that, listen, I am the creator of the initial, like, like Bitcoin, and I have access to Genesis block, and I actually have like all those patents outside, and I have like 3-4 PhDs. It gives you a lot of credibility, and I would say, I mean, it definitely, that probably no one would deny that it gave him a huge PR boost, right? Like everybody was talking about him all of a sudden, right? So that's one of the reasons. And I look, I don't have enough evidence to say whether that's the truth, but also as being like a critical thinker, like, because I cannot disapprove or prove otherwise, right? So it's hard for me to tell, right? And like there are several other people who claim that they're Satoshi, which I also don't believe them, right? So we might not even know yet who is the correct personality.
Well, I think taking, a view that, unlike most in the crypto community, that it's not black and white and it's not 100% that this guy is a fraud, I think makes sense. And I would say, from getting back to the investing side of things, if the main hang up, you or whoever's listening to this has with BSV is the fact that Craig didn't create Bitcoin, first, maybe spend an hour or two look into what he has said around this, as to me, there seems to be a lot of incentives for him not to sign keys publicly. He's said for many years what he hates about what the blockchain community became is this notion of code being law, where he wants to promote law being law. And by signing cryptographic evidence, part of the reason I think he hasn't signed is because he wants to prove that he's in court that he is Satoshi in multiple jurisdictions, of which, cryptographic evidence might be a part of that. So you and I might not understand that. If you or I were in Craig's shoes, we might do something differently. But I think, not understanding his motives or incentives or not agreeing with them, that to me isn't the smoking gun for why he didn't create Bitcoin. I look at the evidence, that is out there, not the lack of something using kind of an Occam's razor of the simple thing is to just sign. But I would say, even if you're nowhere near where I am, let's say high conviction that he created Bitcoin, if the hang up is that, with BSV is that this Craig guy, didn't create it, well, we're looking right now at like a 1 to 30 something ratio between the price of Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin SV, where one is thousands of times faster and cheaper than the other. So if you only give it, say, 15% odds, 10% odds that he created Bitcoin, you still have a really good betting on, I think the network that's fundamentally better, even if you think most likely he didn't create Bitcoin. So, part of the view that we express in the article is that, like, I understand without doing a significant amount of diligence, coming from existing crypto community member to thinking Craig is Satoshi is going to be tough. But it's really hard for me to look at the available evidence out there and come away with the view that he 100% or close to 100% didn't. That to me seems reckless from a diligence point of view. But frankly, it's great for us. We got to buy in at a kind of artificially low price. So, I'm not complaining too much.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of opinions on this. Like, I would say that, like, as long as it's working out for you, look, it's great. I'm happy for you. So that's why, like, my only concern was that, like in multiple conferences and multiple interviews, he just said that he doesn't care about the crypto community at all, right? And so he's kind of like taking this very, I would say, very like lonely position where he is kind of like, this lonely wolf, and he's trying to build something like great, and he's like this genius. Like, to me, it's a little bit like less about the unity and less about like, okay, let's try to collaborate, let's try to find some synergies and try to see like, okay, you don't agree with me, that's fine, but I can see still value in some other products, right? And after him calling Ethereum, which is also a complete nonsense, right? So that was to me a little bit rough, because and I think it was unfair. That's why I don't look at it like, personally, like, like him or I don't. We're in investment world. Sometimes we have to do unpopular decisions, whether we like someone or not. And Vitalik Buterin also called him, like, different words. So I think we'll live it out there, like, between the Binance guys, between the Ethereum community and BSV. It exists. So let's focus on something that is real, meaning the fork is real. Like, there's a growing community, there's a price, and coin market cap. By the way, what is the price now?
Something around 160, and
coin SV, like, right now it has about 3 billion market cap, right? And the price is $163 as of 1st of April 2020. And pretty sizable volume, like, about 1.5 billion per day, right? So tell us about a little bit more, like, how do you find this number 6 right now in the coin market cap, which is, pretty good numbers to be in top 10. It's already, I would say, privilege, right? So how do you foresee the development of the community? And then I think it will be interesting to talk a little bit about the underlying projects.
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of differences between what folks that, hold BTC or folks that are building on Ethereum see the value long-term in blockchain compared to the, kind of original outline in the white paper and the BSV community. So to the BSV community, scaling on-chain is what's most important. So having a blockchain that can scale and that has the properties of immutability is of the utmost important. So let's just take a step back into, like, I think everyone agrees that you need to have some type of scale to have anything work long term. People disagree in how that scales. Some people, look to change proof of work to proof of stake to Istanbul. People look at Lightning Network, where, the Bitcoin Cash kind of originally and now really just BSV in terms of a proof of work network, is looking to kind of scale on chain. So this gets to the heart of proof of work versus proof of stake. So to us, the essential qualities of blockchain is that what is on chain is immutable. So that the balance or the data stored or the smart contracts or applications built can't be changed. And to ensure that immutability, you really have to be in a proof of work context, because that's a key part of what makes it impossible to change, like, any type of data on chain. So when you look at proof of stake or any type of other consensus mechanism, you're leaning on social consensus. And this introduces the problems of existing political systems, we all know very well. And there's no technical or economic barrier to changing what's on chain, like proof of work. It's just social. And another major problem is that of incentives. So proof of stake incentivizes the stagnation of the ecosystem, where proof of work encourages kind of capitalism, where there's always an economic incentive for making things faster and cheaper for users versus trying to accommodate, kind of individual miners, say, within the Bitcoin core community, such that it could always be censorship resistant, but not necessarily be faster and cheaper. They look to scale not on chain without the same properties that, they kind of profess to like about blockchain, like immutability.
So if I may, that's an opinion, because, there's a lot of also controversy there with what you were saying. I would rebuttal a few points, right? First of all, like, in terms of immutability, right? So to me, there was an interesting joke, the community, that if you put like a garbage on the blockchain, right, it'll become an immutable garbage. So there's always this problem of almost like a chicken and egg, right? Like, what happens? Where do we verify the source information, right? Like, where the data comes into the whatever smart contract or like any chain, any blockchain, right? So And then, okay, it becomes immutable. It becomes like, sensor proof, but like, that's like, I would say, another challenge, right? What we cannot change it. Imagine this is a very important data of somebody's like personal information, right? It's whether it's a bank account or your personal ID, and then you cannot even change it. So see, those are also, I would say, challenges that we have to attack. This is number one argument. Number two, I wouldn't.
I don't understand the argument.
So in turn, yeah.
What I'm hearing is that sometimes immutability isn't important, and I would agree with that. I would just say for those cases, blockchain isn't the solution. Databases that we already know are already work pretty well.
No, exactly. So the question is like, and there's always like, this question whether the immutability is even like, necessary at this stage of development, right? Whether it's like, I would say, the most important feature for now, right? The second argument, like, when you said that like a proof of work is only about the capitalism, proof of stake is not, it's also debatable to me at least, right? The more I've read about like Ethereum community and a lot of their development, I wouldn't say that they're not pro-capitalist, right? I think their consensus mechanism might have some flaws, but in terms of scalability, if you compare it to the, Bitcoin core, right? I wouldn't say it's like not that scalable, right? There's obviously certain flaws where, as like in the Bitcoin core consensus, there's a lot of flaws as well, right? So I would say they're equally like not perfect, right? And they're trying to find out solutions.
Yeah, I don't. So a lot of this comes down to, again, what's the value of blockchain? So I think if you throw out immutability, then I would just throw out all blockchains, frankly. Like why build on a blockchain if you don't care about the data not being able to be manipulated? That's what blockchains are for. It's centralizing information in a single place in a secure manner that is able to be secured by a distributed system of miners. So if you don't need immutability, I'd say you don't need blockchain, personally. So I think a kind of a thing to come to understanding on, to start at least, is like there's some things that those in the Bitcoin core, Ethereum, and BSV community all agree on, which is that sometimes immutability is important. So there's definitely differences in terms of when and how, but I think you can't throw out immutability never being important, because to me that's, if you don't have that, there's really no value to blockchain.
100%. I didn't say you have to throw it out. I'm just saying there are a lot of challenges with this as well, right? I would say we're decentralizing, right? Decentralize a distributed ledger where we are trying to make sure that there is no central point of failure, as we had with Equifax, right? One of the biggest like holder of your personal data was hacked, right? So any bank can have the same issue, right? So now they're slowly but surely also trying to get a lot of enterprise solutions, but also if you look at them, all of those like enterprise solutions, they're actually like centralized blockchains. They're not decentralized, and they cannot even allow to have decentralized solutions, right? For now.
Yeah. So they're just really shitty databases. They don't need to be blockchains.
In a way, yes. That's my point exactly, right? So we are trying to play these like marketing like words of blockchain, decentralization and like adding value. But in reality, they're not like advocating the initial ideas, the initial core values that like was described in the Satoshi white paper. So that's my following question to you. If you would describe your philosophy of your fund and your personal investment thesis, right? What would be the 3 or 5, whatever the number may be, like core values for you? Like when you due diligence the project.
Well, a lot of this is coming from the important thesis, which is that we think there is likely to be one blockchain that stores the vast majority of the world's data long term, of which applications are built on top of and relied upon, and kind of transform the existing industries of data storage and cloud computation, and that the network that is fastest and cheapest will probably win out. So that's the big part of our thesis. And to us, in terms of those that are working to do that, for the reasons described around immutability, we throw out all, non-immutable proof of work networks. And then within the proof of work networks, when we do our analysis, we see one chain that's literally thousands of times faster and cheaper than the main version of Bitcoin. So we'd be open to kind of diversifying, but I think with both the economics and incentives of proof of work mining, combined with the ideological approach of the BSV community versus the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Core, Ethereum communities, it's really unlikely for there to be another chain to win out. So the analogy I like to make is like, we're in the mid-90s, we see that this kind of decentralized internet architecture is likely going to win out for fundamental reasons relative to private intranets. So we're only investing in companies that are going to benefit from this long-term infrastructure. So that, I think, is the most important part of our thesis, which is that, investing in a company that isn't building on BSV and is entrenching themselves to, using the Lightning Network, using Bitcoin Core, using Ethereum, using EOS, is going to have either like a minor or major problem when they eventually have to switch to a scaled proof of work blockchain. So just to make it, easy, we only focus on those within the BSV community. And that's kind of had the benefit of moving from, reading a bunch of shitty white papers, pie in the sky ideas largely from folks that don't have a lot of operational experience, is the vast majority of entrepreneurs in the BSV community are highly technical developers with, a lot of operational and creating product experience that have a bias towards revenue generating companies. So even if we pass on someone, I'd say the majority of meetings and ideas we see now are ones that we think are, good and plausible, but maybe don't necessarily fit our kind of long-term thesis. So we're focusing on core infrastructure plays and enterprise adoption, as we think there's much more likely to be enterprise adoption of Bitcoin and data storage and cloud computing before there's consumer adoption. So we're investing in infrastructure that may benefit mainly from consumer adoption over a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon, but we're also trying to focus on, products and companies that benefit from the near-term adoption of, enterprises trying to, let's say, comply with GDPR regulations and, store data in an immutable fashion.
Interesting. So your prediction that someone like EOS, like community, will actually later on will have to switch to BSV?
Well, I think most of the projects in crypto in general are just going to die because they're not good companies or projects that are solving real problems. But I think of the companies that are solving real problems that, are using technology that, isn't that great and doesn't scale or doesn't provide immutability, they're going to have to switch to better technology. So right now, I'm very high conviction that technology they'll have to switch to, if they actually need immutability, which is a small minority of projects in the crypto space, but for projects that actually need the benefits of blockchain, I think the blockchain that's going to win out is what they're going to switch to. And right now, there's no serious competition to BSV. So there might be in the future, but it seems unlikely.
So you don't consider Bitcoin Cash as a competitor, no?
No, because I think it could be a competitor the same way Bitcoin Core could be a competitor, but there's a ideological approach to prioritizing, being antagonistic to governments around the world and being resistant to laws and regulations as opposed to trying to scale. So I don't really see that changing anytime soon. So if that does, I could see either of those versions of Bitcoin meaningfully competing with BSV, but already in the short period BSV has been around, it has gone to thousands of times faster and cheaper. And don't trust me on this. There's a great website called coin.dance that compares all the various stats around the different Bitcoin networks. But that delta is increasing really fast. Like, when we looked at this for our investor deck a few days ago, we're seeing that even at like a relative low over the last couple months, there's twice the amount of transactions on BSV as there are on Bitcoin Core now, and that's continuing to grow. So I think by the time the ideological approach of the different Bitcoins, perhaps comes around to this, you're going to look at, 50,000 times as many transactions, and then there won't really be a point to trying to compete. It'll just be, let's, focus on the Bitcoin that actually works.
Yeah, that's an interesting opinion. I would say partially I would agree with you. Like, and I think, the winner definitely like the fastest and the most scalable solution and I would say also adoption would mean a lot, in terms of like how many projects would actually be on this like network, because we see a lot of great like, networks that also like technically they can cope with like almost like, not thousands, hundred thousands of transactions, but they're not popular due to other political issues, I would say, right? And the combination
Those aren't blockchains. Those aren't proof of work secured blockchains. Those are with other social consensus mechanisms. Yeah.
Exactly. Either a consensus mechanism, but I'm saying they exist, right? So there were a lot of I would say bootstrapping and a lot of experiments, right? So they work in different practical terms, whether it's enterprise solution or some like closed network, even government like projects. So I believe we're gonna have a vast adoption, like and going to be a huge differentiator between the decentralized communities and people who are like, I would say, quasi hybrid models, whether like it's in essence it will be centralized solutions, so cold blockchains, right? But it'll be not actually they will not go after the values of the decentralized community, right? So which brings me to another question to you in terms of the practicality, like can you bring up maybe briefly some practical examples of projects that I would say you personally invested and you like them, like they give some practical value based on the BSV, right?
Well, before diving into the projects, I'd like to just I think address like where immutability and where a scaled blockchain comes into play now. So we're still actively thinking about this question, and any thoughts, feedback from yourself or others listening is much appreciated, as the question of who benefits most from a scaled Bitcoin today, not even looking at Bitcoin with many terabyte blocks in the future, but who benefits from the many multi-megabyte blocks on BSV today. So I kind of bucket that into a few different categories. There's those that are looking to store data in an immutable fashion. So that could be companies that large, medium enterprises that right now are paying multiple third-party providers, both cloud, physical, have internal things, so that they don't lose any data, and they have to have so many redundancies because this data is so important that they can't lose it. So adding a service that stores data on chain or stores a hash of the data on chain could be really valuable as part of that stack. Then there's those that have data as a liability. So if you are going to get fined or potentially go out of business for exposing customer data and getting hacked, which is true of almost every major enterprise that exists in the world, being able to put your data on something where you at least in my view already have a greater security than any kind of private non-blockchain solution, that's a valuable thing. And then payments. So with BSV now, you can send virtually any amount of money for fractions of a cent instantly in a secure, immutable manner. There's no other technology that comes close to competing with that right now. So those are kind of the basis of like the types of companies we look for. So
can we make a practical example? If I were to send to you right now $100, right, and I would to use, let's say, Bitcoin Core, then I don't know, maybe if you can compare it with Ethereum, and I would do BSV. Like what is a commission that I would pay to you?
That's a great question. So, again, as part of this investor deck, we're kind of updating right now into the month.
Yeah.
As of 2 days ago,
I'll pay the commission to the network. Sorry, like not to you.
Yeah, no. So as of a couple days ago, it was 2,300 times as expensive to use Bitcoin Core as Bitcoin SV, and about 6,000 times as slow. So those are kind of the two metrics that really matter in my view. It's speed and cost. I can't speak to Ethereum offhand. I could find that information easily, but I think it's probably somewhere around where Bitcoin Core is. But like, we're not talking about twice as fast. We're not talking about 5 times as fast. We're not even talking about 100 times as fast. We're talking about like oscillating between 2,000 times as fast and like 20,000 times as fast today.
How do you measure the speed, like, the transaction, like, what was the metrics that you would say, like, you can even measure those, like, and you've mentioned there are several public websites that allow you to compare it, right?
I never made a transaction that isn't instant. Well, that's the power of, literally being thousands of times as fast, So even on like the most congested, we're talking about, a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, like never enough to like really meaningfully notice like that this didn't just happen.
So basically, we're not talking about minutes; it's seconds.
Yeah, and that has continued to become faster because that's what happens when you prioritize scaling over, resisting laws and regulations. You kind of achieve scale. So with Bitcoin Core and the 1 megabyte block size, you're never going to be able to scale on chain. That's the choice that the community is making. Where at BSV, the community is constantly pushing the limits of the size of the blocks. We've seen 1.4 gigabyte blocks on the testnet. We've seen 280 or 256 megabyte blocks on the actual Bitcoin blockchain. And as demand for these, block sizes increase, as enterprise adoption and data storage and cloud computation demand increases, there's going to be more incentive for miners to innovate and to be able to accommodate these blocks.
So you don't see Lightning Network as a solution to increase the scalability?
No, Lightning Network is not a solution. It can't really work by design. So here's a question for you about Lightning. Do you know approximately what percentage of capital you need to lock up to be able to send a given amount of capital? So let's say you want to send $1 and you want to be sure that that dollar is not going to, go poof. Approximately how much money do you need to lock up to do that?
Percentage-wise, I don't actually remember. If you can help me on this, no.
So it's from what I've last looked, it's on average about 40% greater. So, for this to work in kind of a decentralized way, you have to lock up 140%, but that ranges from like 110 or 105 to like 500% sometimes. It's really variable because it's constantly changing in Lightning Network, so it's on an individual basis. But, for Lightning Network to work in kind of the decentralized way as designed, you have to get, small business owners, medium-sized business owners to allocate significant amounts of their balance sheet towards using the solution, which, I think from just like a basic business analysis anyone that's ever run a business knows that's never going to happen. So how Lightning Network is used practically now is you're just trusting these third-party services to lock up more capital, and you're just sending the money that you need. And then you just get like a really, shitty Venmo, Zelle infrastructure. That's also in direct contravention of, the laws of any first world, developed country, that any state channel on Lightning Network is a money transmitter. So by using this or operating a node, you're, in violation of, these money transmitter laws and liable for any kind of dirty dollar that goes through your network. So,
Zelle is also, by the way, is on blockchain. You know that, right?
It's on a database that they're calling a blockchain. Yeah. I don't think Zelle is a great solution either, but I don't think Zelle is the ideal to shoot for. I'm just saying that's kind of what we're comparing to. We're not comparing to something innovative. So it can't work from a standpoint of economic incentives, and it's in direct violation of the laws of the countries that probably most people listening to this are living in. So I do see a future in which you have things like Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Cash, Monero existing to kind of serve a small niche of people that want to transact outside laws and regulations. And I don't say that as like a moral judgment. I think having those things like can serve some value. I just, as an investor, I want to bet on the thing that isn't kind of openly fighting what governments around the world are saying in existing laws. So I think Lightning is an even worse bet, where there's no chance of it working and scaling.
Okay, I see your point here. And it's a separate discussion. I have a lot to say to this, but I would prefer to focus on the practical projects, that you've came across and that you personally invested, and you see value in those projects, and why are they important? What problems are they solving?
So because we're really early to the BSV community and ecosystem, and we're investing in long-term infrastructure, I think a lot of the things we're going to be investing into isn't going to necessarily feel like it solves that clear problem right now. It's going to enable many companies to use the companies we invest in to solve those problems. So just a quick recap. That's why I kind of mentioned the payments and data storage as these use cases. So we haven't invested in any companies directly that are solving that for enterprises right now. We've invested in a few companies that are enabling people to solve those problems. So one of the companies we've invested in is called Run on Bitcoin. And they're a platform for building smart contracts, applications, games on top of Bitcoin. So one of their clients right now is a company called Chronoverse, which originally was a gaming company in Ethereum. Then the founder realized Ethereum isn't never going to scale, so switched over to BSV. And through Run, they have the first game that's fully on chain. So anytime kind of immutability is important, and you want to use JavaScript to build an application, which is the most known or one of the most known developer languages, Run is a good solution to use, and we see a ton of kind of companies in the BSV space using them. So, and we have a couple other infrastructure companies like that, but that's how we're thinking about things, like the platforms that will be essential for people to build businesses, like the way Google and Facebook benefit from any type of venture capital and new industry. Like these are essential services for solving the problems, as opposed to being something a little more tangible. As I see greater long-term upside in those types of infrastructure plays.
So what you're saying right now is more like a platform for a longer-term growth for the entire community, right? And building this is like a layer of infrastructure that is needed, but like there will be another layer, so going to be added like a little bit further down the line, right?
Yeah, it's the age-old question of do you invest in infrastructure, do you invest in applications, and to what degree are application infrastructure? This is a debate before crypto was a thing and was a market. So our view is we want to invest in long-term infrastructure. Sometimes there's applications that fulfill that, and I think you could argue that perhaps even all of our portfolio companies are somewhat applications. But I would say we try to invest in businesses that are essential for people to solve these problems, and we'll likely invest in some businesses directly solving these problems for large enterprises. But at the stage we're at right now, I think these kind of platform plays are going to be the better bets.
Separate conversation for a separate interview, and how does it practically work, because there's a lot of nuances in this, but I'm sure people who are interested, they can contact you directly. And the probably the last question I would ask you is, we are having this crazy situation with coronavirus, an impact in the global economy, and there's almost $6+ trillion stimulus package, and there's people are saying that it's a short recession right now. There's a lot of bearish predictions, and we can see that the stock market reacted accordingly. And long story short, crypto was designed in sort of almost like a hedge to a lot of traditional derivatives. And my question to you, what is if you would give out prediction, right? What's going to happen in the nearest future, especially considering the May events and halving event. So maybe give us a little bit of your vision.
Well, first off, I take issue with saying Bitcoin was designed as a hedge to the traditional things. I don't think there's really evidence of that. I think that definitely the majority of the community has viewed it as such, despite empirical evidence to the contrary. But I see long term a Bitcoin with utility and scale potentially being a meaningful hedge to fiat currencies. But I think in its current form, especially the main version of Bitcoin, where holding it, I think puts yourself to some degree of legal risk, transacting on it puts yourself at legal risk, and the fact that it doesn't really work that well in terms of speed and effectiveness, I don't see Bitcoin Core being a meaningful hedge anytime soon. I see long-term, a scaled version of Bitcoin potentially being a hedge there, but I view it much more as it's a commodity where it's kind of like you had the opportunity to buy the commodity native to the internet if payments were part of the original kind of internet tech stack and protocol. So the commodity is just a function of how many transactions, of which I think long-term those transactions are more likely to be storing data and running applications as opposed to transacting, dollar, like a monetary value.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you. I don't even view that as a currency. I'm talking about more of a store of value functionality, like a digital gold
Sure.
replacement in a way.
Yeah. So I think long term, when the digital gold has higher utility and has less volatility, then perhaps. But I think we're many years away from that. If you're looking at something as a store of value, I mean, I think gold is not that great, and Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin SV right now are even worse because they are just much more volatile. So can something like have good asymmetric upside in times of crisis with fiat currency? Like that's a different bet and a different risk profile, and definitely not, I think, a safe haven. I don't think there's really much fundamental or empirical reason to support that personally. So in the near term, I see crypto largely correlating with global markets as they've continued to, and in times of kind of increased volatility, whether upwards but especially downwards, I see greater correlation, and we have kind of empirical evidence to support that, both recently and in previous times of volatility. So I personally I think it's like S&P is more likely to have like a big dip than it is likely to have a big run up in the near future. I don't really have high conviction either way. I think crypto will roughly track that. But I do think that there are some events in crypto that could, make certain assets not track equities whatsoever. And one of them is the halving. So generally speaking, in financial markets, when there's a consensus around something definitely happening, when there's not, I think, clear fundamental reasons it's going to happen, I think if you look history of financial markets, you see those things likely don't happen and the opposite occurs. And I think the halving this year is an example of that. So most folks in the crypto community look at the fact that it happened to go up a lot during previous halvings and therefore it's going to go up now. Some people cite the fact that there's going to be less future Bitcoins, but that's kind of negligible in terms of like the actual, supply and dynamics of how the Bitcoin core network functions now. What really matters to me is the profitability for miners. So right now, the vast majority of the time, it's more profitable to mine Bitcoin SV than it is to mine, Bitcoin Core and to a lesser degree Bitcoin Cash, and it all uses the same, hashing algorithm such that switching over between the Bitcoin networks is relatively trivial for miners. They can't necessarily do it in the most efficient way per each network, especially Bitcoin Core miners switching to BSV, but they could still capture a lot of the transactions relatively seamlessly. And to me, why the halving matters is the profitability for miners goes down almost 50% overnight for Bitcoin Core, where it goes down a lot less on BSV because the way miners make money, I think long term, the only way that works is by either inflating the currency and lifting the 21 million cap, or by making enough from transaction fees, which you only get with scale. So because Bitcoin Core is writing off scaling the network, and for now they're writing off inflating, the currency, I think you're going to see mining profitability continue to dwindle. And given it's like, close to 100% of what miners make are from the mining rewards and not transaction fees, whatever that delta is at the time of the halving between the percentage of revenue that miners make from transaction fees to mining rewards from BSV to kind of Bitcoin Core, there's going to be an instant arbitrage there between those two networks, where it's instantly that percentage more profitable to mine BSV than Bitcoin Core the second that halving occurs. So if enough people switch then and enough hash power moves over, I think you could have like a kind of a positive feedback loop for BSV hash power, negative feedback loop for BTC hash power, and then I think similar feedback loops for the price. And if that's coupled with, say, other events going on, then any massive buys or sells of either one of the currencies, then I think you can see potentially some major moves. And I wouldn't say this is likely, but in terms of kind of black swan events, everyone I would say would view the death of the Bitcoin Core network as like 0% approaching zero, where I would probably put it between 10 and 15% as happening around the halving. And that's why I'm happy a lot of our, most of our exposure in our liquid fund and a lot of our exposure in our main fund is not actually by owning BSV itself. It's by doing a swap between Bitcoin SV and Bitcoin Core, where we're simultaneously shorting Bitcoin Core and going long Bitcoin SV. So
You're shorting right now Bitcoin Core, so you have several short positions, right?
Yes. The main purpose of that position is to just be more market neutral, to express our BSV long thesis, and to get leverage at a really effective, a really great price. But the added benefit is if we see a scenario where the BSV and Bitcoin Core stop tracking one another and BSV ascends and Bitcoin Core or Bitcoin Cash descend, then we profit significantly more than just shorting or just owning BSV with substantially less volatility and risk involved.
But what is the risk management in case if Bitcoin Core goes up and Bitcoin SV goes down? So what's your risk strategy there?
So depending on how things are going on both a fundamental as well as just price basis, we will close those swaps as well as potentially buy options on Bitcoin Core so we can, relatively cheaply hedge those risks. Because there's a lot of volatility in Bitcoin, especially lately, all the versions of Bitcoin, the options are incredibly expensive. So doing kind of long-term options hedging doesn't really make sense, but we're kind of set up and all prepared to be able to, hedge if something changes.
Got it. Okay, so we're gonna do a blitz at the end, right? So your favorite book that you would recommend to read for a person who's trying to learn about crypto?
Antifragile. I know everyone's probably going to say that one, but I think before learning about, anything investing wise, having a good framework for understanding, understanding how to look at risk is good. And really, any of the Taleb books are great, but I would start with Antifragile and then read Black Swan after that.
Perfect. And then, the most important person for you, personally in this community.
The most important person in this community, and I'd probably say my team. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but that's who I learn the most from and who I think is doing some of the best research out there. I'm obviously biased, but they're the most important people for me. I'll give you an answer too of outside the team. Honestly, it's going to be Craig and Calvin. I mean, Calvin is spending his time and his capital growing the ecosystem and investing so much money into building this out. And Craig is amassing a patent fortress of blockchain patents that be able to use perpetually for free on BSV, and also doing so much in terms of guiding the development of the community. So I think both of those folks are adding a lot of value to our community.
Got it. No, I'd really love to continue the conversation with you later, and I enjoyed our interview. I think you have a very, very interesting contrarian view on many things, right? Which is great, which makes you successful and makes you where you are right now at 27, managing a hedge fund and a successful one. So best of luck to your team, and I hope we can share more of this idea. So I will put up all of the links, that Zach mentioned. I will put them in the description, and then we'll make sure that all the legal disclaimers are also okay, right?
Yep.
So again, it's not an investment advice. We're just talking about and expressing our personal opinions. And it was just great talking to you, Zach. And I hope you stay safe and healthy during this, turmoil with coronavirus.
Yeah, likewise. You too, Constantine. It was a real pleasure to come on today. Thank you.
Thank you.